Hello, and welcome back to our series of lectures and discussions about the concepts presented in Why Nations Fail by Asameglu and Robinson. These are a set of very simple, but on the other hand, very powerful and very revelatory concepts which explain a lot of the problems with the political economy in the world today. It gives us a historical perspective on these problems. It shows us how those problems evolved from critical junctures in the historical record. It also shows how institutions diverged, and some institutions became what they call extractive, and others became inclusive. So there's a there are additional concepts in the book, but those are the most critical ones for you to grasp, and those are the ones which we're going to use in the subsequent readings in the class once we finished with Why Nations Fail. But today we're going to talk about two more concepts. One is the iron law of oligarchy, and the other is the notion of what they call vicious circles. And these are both very useful in understanding why nations continue to fail in our time as well. So let's start with what an oligarchy is. Simply put, an oligarchy means rule by the few. Sometimes they're called dictatorships, sometimes they're called authoritarian governments, and sometimes they're referred to oligarchy. This is, not the most widely used term, but you often hear it, for instance, in relation to Russia, where you hear about the so-called Russian oligarchs who surround President Putin in Russia. And these are a group of very politically powerful and very wealthy business people, but maybe not necessarily all business people. But they could be also in the military. They could even be in the church in the case of Russia, where you have a small group of individuals who are truly dominating both the political and the economic agenda in the country. There are a number of oligarchies in existence today. We can, when you looked at the list of failed states in the previous lecture, many of those countries on the bottom of the failed state index could be classified as oligarchies. On the other hand, oligarchies aren't necessarily bad. They just happen to tend that way. And we could go to the famous quote by the British political scientist Lord Acton, who said, power, whether it be political power or economic power, he said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are always bad men. That was his view of history, and there's a certain logic to that. If we look at how these oligarchs came to power, how they exercise their power, and also how they deal with any challengers to their power. So if you want to look for an example today, perhaps Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe is a perfect example of an oligarchy. Robert Mugabe and his cronies have ruled Zimbabwe since the 1980s with a very iron hand and a very extractive manner. If your taste goes towards the fictional, you can also look at the the nation of Panem in the film The Hunger Games, and how President Snow and his predecessors rule Panem, and that'll give you a sort of a real good sense of what an oligarchy is. So, what is the iron law of oligarchy? Well, that actually was a doctrine formulated by a German political sociologist named Robert Michel. It states that any time you try to build an organization, you will necessarily have the rise of elites within that organization that will try to exert power over their domain. In the Acemoglu and Robinson text, they use a lot of examples from post-independence Africa and Asia to illustrate how one elite simply replaces another, often in actually a more negative way. And that this is a cycle which perpetuates itself because there isn't a base of inclusion, of political inclusion, to prevent new elites from simply taking over the apparatus that was put in place by the previous elites. So that's one of the real problems when you don't have an inclusive, participatory political system. So we can ask: are oligarchies inevitable? Is this continuation, this iron law of oligarchy? Is it an inevitable situation? Well, if we look at history, we can see that no, it's not. That we have various examples. We have the Glorious Revolution in England, followed by the American Revolution, then the French Revolution, and then even the Meiji Restoration in Japan, which broke the back of the oligarchs who were running, really running Japan and preventing Japan from developing. So in each case, when you had the emergence of broad coalitions within society, that created an acceleration of development on the economic side that really explains why there is such a divergence in the world today between developed nations and undeveloped or underdeveloped countries in different parts of the world. And according to the authors, this is a direct result of inclusive political institutions as opposed to exclusive or extractive ones. So when we look at how the iron law has played out in our time, in countries that exist today, we can take the Congo as a prime example of how the iron law has worked. In the 19th century, you had King Leopold of Belgium basically ran the Congo as a private economic enterprise, as a business, and it was one of the worst extractive sort of political and economic environments that you can imagine. But then a curious thing happened after Congo got its independence in the early 1960s. You had the emergence of President Mobutu, who basically just took over that extractive system and made it his own, and made the Congo one of the most corrupt and pernicious political and social environments on the planet. And then when Mobutu was overthrown by Joseph Kabila, there was basically a continuation of that. I mean, it wasn't as bad as Mobutu. It isn't as bad as Mobutu, but it certainly bears a lot of the same characteristics. So, because you don't have the emergence of a broad coalition of civil society and other actors, wealthy business people and academics and even sort of liberal-minded military military officers, clergy. When you don't have this coalition of groups that are competing for power and actually influencing how things operate, then you really don't have much progress. So then finally we ask, what are vicious circles? So basically a vicious circle is it's a system that doesn't change, and where you have a constant cycling of extractive political systems generating extractive economic systems, which then form the base and the power base of the political system. And the extractive political system uses that economic system to really stay in power, and that just perpetuates itself over time until you get to a critical juncture, which could be the death of an oligarch. It could be a war. It could be a natural disaster. But something happens in the environment which breaks the cycle. And as we move on to an in-depth study of West Africa, you'll see that this process works itself out in very tragic consequences. So, lastly, we can ask, how do you break this system? Well, iron law of oligarchy is not like the laws of physics. So they call it a law, but it's it's really it has much different characteristics. But it is possible to change, because of a critical juncture, because of an opening of new opportunities. And that revolutions will succeed when the power that's being challenged, instead of just flowing to another group of elites, that it's redistributed to a wide portion of society. And that, for example, is we can look in the 20th century for two examples where that didn't happen. In the case of both the Russian and the Chinese revolutions. So in Russia, you had the aristocracy, the emperor just replaced the emperor and his cohort, replaced by the Bolshevik cohort of Lenin and Stalin, which really resulted in some tragic circumstances for a large number of people in Russia. So that's all I have to say about this topic. I think if you combine these concepts with the previous ones, you have a pretty good, a pretty powerful set of ideas with which to evaluate the political economy of any country. So thank you.